The launch window opens in 3.5 minutes and closes in 2 hours. And just based on the nominal timeline, just looking at the clock, not considering the time it may take to condition the engine number 3 on the core stage if the bleed was restored at this moment. Just looking at the countdown clock, there's about 80 minutes from right now until the earliest possible launch opportunity. But there are other factors at work, including the time needed to troubleshoot and restore this bleed flow if it's at all possible, if it's even possible today, and then get the engine down to the proper conditions, proper thermal conditions. So with this engine bleed issue still unresolved, the odds of a launch this morning appear to be declining here at the Kennedy Space Center, but still no official word on a scrub from the launch team or the launch director at this time. The countdown has been in this unplanned hold at T-minus 4 minutes for about 1 hour and 4 minutes or so, maybe 1 hour and 5 minutes at this time. At the time of the beginning of the hold, NASA's launch commentator said the team expected the hold to last just about 10 minutes, so we're well beyond that. And again, the weather conditions are expected to become less favorable over the next few minutes, with a rain shower about to move over the Kennedy Space Center. And it looks like it's on a path to also move over the Launch Pad 39B area. But the weather is a secondary factor right now. The main concern is the engine bleed on engine number 3 of the core stage. And we've now hit the opening of this morning's Artemis-1 launch window. It's 8:33 a.m. Eastern Time. It's now 12:33 UTC. So this was the opening of this morning's 2-hour launch window here at the Kennedy Space Center for Artemis-1. But liftoff is not happening at the opening of the window, and odds of it happening before the end of the window aren't looking particularly favorable at this time. NASA Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson has just announced and confirmed a scrub. So the Artemis-1 mission will not be launching this morning. The next available launch opportunity, assuming this engine bleed issue that caused the scrub can be resolved, would be no earlier than Friday. NASA's launch commentator has now signed off, and we're not expecting to hear any more real-time updates from the Launch Control Center, but if you're just joining us, the launch was scrubbed by Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson a couple of minutes ago due to this issue with the engine bleed on engine number 3 of the core stage of the Space Launch System Moon rocket. Engineers have spent the last couple of hours evaluating this issue, and despite multiple different types of troubleshooting attempts, they were not able to get this flow going enough to cool down and thermally condition engine number 3, and it has to be at a certain temperature threshold. Engines 1, 2, and 4 met that threshold, but engine number 3 did not reach that thermal threshold. So the next steps will be to back out of the launch countdown and drain the Artemis-1 rocket of its cryogenic propellants. The team had the rocket nearly fully loaded, not quite 100% full on all of its tanks. The core stage was fully loaded. The upper stage did not quite reach the full point, not quite the 100% levels on the upper stage. So those propellants will be drained over the coming hours. That's a multi-hour process to drain those propellants, just as it was a multi-hour process to load them. The next launch opportunity would be no earlier than Friday at 12:48 p.m. Eastern Time. That is the opening of a 2-hour window, so 12:48 p.m. to 2:48 p.m. Eastern, 16:48 to 18:48 UTC. But that launch opportunity Friday hinges on the successful resolution of this engine bleed issue, which is a constraint to launch. You're looking now at the engine bay on the core stage, the 4 RS-25 engines visible there. If we have our bearings right from where this camera is located, we believe engine number 3 is the engine in the foreground, the most visible engine on the lower left of this view. is engine number 3. This wider view of the Artemis-1 vehicle, this looks from a camera on one of the lightning protection towers, looking toward the southeast, out over the Atlantic Ocean. You can see that rain shower that we discussed a few minutes ago is approaching the Kennedy Space Center area. It's currently already raining over Cape Canaveral Space Force Station next door. To the right, on the right edge of the screen, you can see SpaceX's Launch Complex 39A. So just to recap what happened with this countdown, the loading of cryogenic propellants began nearly an hour late due to a thunderstorms that brought the threat of lightning inside the 5-mile ring around the launch pad. That's a constraint for propellant loading. That lightning cleared, allowing the cryogenic tanking operation to get underway. There was a detection, a signature of a hydrogen leak in the tail service mast umbilical that connects the mobile launch platform with the bottom of the core stage. That leak was detected when the core stage liquid hydrogen loading transitioned from slow fill to fast fill. And after some troubleshooting steps, including the restart of, first of all, the termination of flow of liquid hydrogen, then the restart of flow into the core stage at slow fill mode, and then back into fast fill, it appeared like that leak level decreased back to within acceptable limits, and that allowed the core stage to be fully loaded with liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. So NASA got a full load of propellants on the core stage during this countdown, a little later than expected, behind schedule, but a full load of propellants on the core stage. And then the next step was to begin this bleed into the engine section, to begin chilling those engines down for ignition. This bleed system also caused trouble back on a wet dress rehearsal, practice countdown on June the 20th. The launch team detected a leak in a 4-inch quick disconnect connector that flows hydrogen into that engine bay, into that engine compartment for chill down. NASA's launch team continued the practice countdown despite that leak. They masked that leak. It was not a constraint to continuing that countdown rehearsal. It would have been for a launch, but they were able to continue down to T-minus 30 seconds, gathering a lot of data and practice run through the countdown for the launch team. And then at that point, NASA rolled the Artemis-1 rocket back into the vehicle assembly building for final closeouts and outfitting for launch, and a repair to that hydrogen leak in the bleed system and that quick disconnect fitting, and then return the rocket to the pad earlier this month for today's launch opportunity for the Artemis-1 test flight to the moon. So that leak that was found back on June the 20th prevented the bleed flow from getting underway into the engines, and prevented NASA and the launch team from testing that bleed function. That was one of the items, one of the boxes left unchecked from that wet dress rehearsal. And it appears, at least right now, that may be related to the issue that caused the scrub today. We'll wait for further details from the NASA launch team. We hope to hear from them in a press briefing, potentially. We haven't heard official schedule for a press briefing yet from NASA to gather more details on exactly what happened. Now, a little more than 20 minutes since Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson declared a scrub for today's Artemis 1 launch attempt. You're continuing to watch live views from Launch Complex 39B. This is a view from the top of the mobile launch tower looking down on the Space Launch System, which stands 322 feet or 98 meters in height. With this countdown, this launch attempt now scrubbed, the next step will be the safing and securing of the Space Launch System, as well as the draining of cryogenic propellants from the rocket. As you can see, that rain shower we saw approaching a few minutes ago has now arrived at pad 39B. Some rain is now falling out at the launch pad. And we'll still await further word later today or in the coming days on when NASA might be ready to make another run at launching this Artemis 1 mission to the moon. Hello again from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. You're looking at live at Launch Complex 39B at the Orion spacecraft, sitting on top of the Space Launch System moon rocket following today's scrubbed countdown. NASA Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson declared a scrub at around 8:35 a.m. Eastern Time, about 35 minutes ago. Due to this issue with the engine bleed flow leading into engine number 3 on the bottom of the core stage. This is one of the 4 RS-25 engines on the bottom of the core stage of the Space Launch System. And here's a view up close of that engine bay at the bottom of the core stage. You can see these 4 RS-25 engines. These are leftover engines from the Space Shuttle program. All have flown on the Space Shuttle before. And we believe, if we have our bearings right on where this camera is, engine number 3 is the one on the lower left in the foreground. You can see these engines are wrapped in thermal insulation, a heat shield, a heat barrier, where they connect into the core stage engine section. The bleed flow is designed to feed a little bit of liquid hydrogen into the engines to begin conditioning them. This is a procedure that's known in the rocket business as chill down. The engines have to be at a certain thermal threshold, temperature threshold, to be ready for ignition and ready for flight. 3 of the 4 engines reached that threshold with their bleed flows this morning, but engine number 3 did not. The launch team performed multiple troubleshooting steps, cycling valves, increasing pressure in the liquid hydrogen tank to try to force that fluid, that propellant, through the bleed line into the engine. None of those activities got the result that the launch team wanted, though, and ultimately the launch director declared a scrub. It's not officially known yet when the next launch opportunity might be for the Artemis-1 mission. Just based on orbital dynamics alone, the next opportunity to launch the mission would be no earlier than Friday. There's a 2-hour launch window available Friday, 12:48 p.m. to 2:48 p.m. Eastern Time, 16:48 to 18:48 UTC. But that will hinge, obviously, on the resolution of this engine bleed issue, which is a constraint to launch. NASA has launch opportunities beginning Friday, September 2nd, as well as September 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th to begin the Artemis-1 mission to the moon. If the launch isn't off by September the 6th, the next launch period opens on September the 19th. But there are other constraints and factors that the team will have to consider. One of those, obviously, is if the repair to this engine bleed requires access to certain parts of the vehicle or the ground support system, the tail service mast umbilical, for example, the rocket could have to be rolled back to the VAB, to the vehicle assembly building, for that repair work. And that repair notwithstanding, if the rocket is not off the ground by September the 6th, the NASA team will have to roll the vehicle back into the VAB anyway for servicing and testing of the flight termination system, which is only certified for 25 days after the testing of that system. And that clock will run out after the September the 6th launch opportunity. And NASA officials have said if the rocket has to be returned to the vehicle assembly building, it would be very difficult to have the rocket ready to fly in the next launch period, which runs from September the 19th through October the 4th. So if a rollback to the vehicle assembly building is required, that would almost certainly push the next Artemis-1 launch opportunity into October. But we'll wait and see what NASA says, what the engineers determine might be the cause of this engine bleed issue, and what could be done at the launch pad. The teams will be assessing their options before deciding on a path forward. Before we sign off our live countdown coverage, we'll ask you one more time, if you want to support our coverage, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. We have different membership tiers that you can join at depending on which level you join at. You can gain access to exclusive video features on our YouTube channel, and you'll also be helping us continue and expand our launch coverage. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also like our YouTube channel to help us gain a wider audience for our launch coverage as well. And if you're a collector or if you're interested in space flight memorabilia, you can go to our Spaceflight Now store. That's shop.spaceflightnow.com. And there you can purchase mission patches. On the left, we have several related to this flight. We have the Artemis program patch on the top left. Below that, there's the ArtemisⅠ mission patch. And below that, we have an Artemis commemorative patch available for purchase in the Spaceflight Now store. That's at shop.spaceflightnow.com. So we'll have further updates on the status of the ArtemisⅠ launch on spaceflightnow.com, as well as on our social media channels. So follow us there. And we thank you for joining us for our overnight coverage of the ArtemisⅠ countdown. The mission did not get off the ground today. We'll stand by and await word from NASA on when the team may make another run at launching this historic test flight. Until next time, I'm Stephen Clark reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Thanks for joining us.
first selfie on the moon? Nevin Matthews, this is interesting. The first computer on the moon, but I would imagine that there's already been that type of. I guess I don't know if you would call it a computer, but there, of course, when we landed on the moon decades ago, there was already advanced technological equipment that likely did have some forms of computers, of course, too. But I don't know that has an actual computer, what you would define as a computer, been on the moon? I'm not sure.
I don't know, because we always, the fascinating thing to say is that everybody in the world now carries around in their pocket more computing power than they went to the moon in the 60s with. So the fact that, they had some computing, big room-sized computers, there was certainly not ones like even close to what we carry around in our pockets with our phones these days. So something to that effect, yes. I mean, what we would consider a personal computer has not been on the moon.
This is really over now because they just went to You Are Watching.
It has been fun. We will see you on Friday, maybe.
See you later. So they're now going to the NASA broadcast to show you some of the fun clips and some of the fun programming that they have all the time on NASA TV. We're going to go through a few more here. I keep seeing this. I don't know why. The first Dollar General.
I think that's trending for some reason.
Is it?
I'm not sure, but just Dollar General in
general?
In general is trending. I'll give you $1.
Christina Rich, #KG, what should be the first movie watched or even made on the moon? That's an interesting one. The first blog, says Einen. Michael, #KJB, the first disco. Yeah. See, that's the first dance party.
I can tell by the way I use my walk.
I'm a lunar man.
Yeah, I'm a lunar man.
No time to talk. That's awesome. I love it. Let's see. The first ever orchestra on the moon. Wow, that's a powerful thought.
It'd be beautiful. You wouldn't be able to hear it open, but I mean, the whole idea is that we're building something to close it. Yeah,
to close it off.
Beautiful.
Ken Bowser, the first bit of sarcasm. That's great.
I'm willing to bet that Buzz Aldrin said something sarcastic out there that didn't get beamed back to the United States.
Yep. First, Venkat making a good point. First, we talked about this earlier, the first person of color. These are important, big firsts. And then we're now getting into the lesser important. Oh, this is a great one. You're going to love this. You're going to love this.
Okay.
You're going to love this. How about the first wedding on the moon?
I do love it.
Now, that is awesome.
That'll be.
Then look, as we're looking here at some NASA TV programming of the lunar surface. The first wedding on the moon.
That's a good one.
The first person to propose on the moon. Ooh, these are really good ones now. That's
setting the bar really high.
It is. Because how do you, all engagements or weddings, like you got married on the moon. Yeah. Like if your friend got married on the moon, then you're just like.
It's a destination.
That's a destination wedding.
That's a destination.
That's the joke. Okay, wait, hold on. I've got the rim shot for it. There it is. That's a great one. Speaking of a type of comment, I wonder if Jeff Bezos was watching today. Oh. Christina Rich, the first Amazon delivery. You think Prime 2 days extends to the moon?
At some point, yes.
At some point it will.
At some point, yes. They'd have to have with Blue Horizon. What, Blue Origin? Why am I?
Yeah, Blue Origin.
Blue Origin. They'd be like, okay, we're sitting. It'll be 2 days because we have to spend 2 days in space to get you. But I think why not?
How about the first house on the moon? Yep, Sai, I think you're onto something here. One or two more before we got to get going. Julian.
Und bist du eigentlich auch dabei beim Space Creator Day?
Ja.
Sehr geil.
Ich habe mich heute angemeldet. Also als Creator halt bin ich auch dabei. Deswegen freue ich mich auch schon riesig drauf. Wird Wahnsinn.
Das Ding ist, das war ja ursprünglich gedacht für 30, 40 Leute in einem sehr, sehr kleinen Kreis und plötzlich ist das Ganze eskaliert und jetzt haben wir plötzlich mit dem Museum noch Mörder nachverhandeln müssen, dass wir überhaupt das Kontingent von 250 Leuten bekommen und alle Tickets sind ausverkauft leider, weil wir das alles einfach viel zu spontan. Aber nächstes Jahr wollen wir ein viel größeres Kontingent, wenn nicht doppelt so großes Kontingent haben und der Vorverkauf beginnt dann auch, sobald wir die offizielle Zusage vom Museum haben. Und wir planen fürs nächste Jahr dann das Ganze ein bisschen zugänglicher zu machen, beziehungsweise früher zu bewerben, damit dann auch wirklich alle dazukommen können, die dabei sein wollen. Leider, wir haben nicht mit diesem großen Andrang gerechnet, aber richtig cool einfach, dass da dieses große Interesse besteht. Sorry, Jess. Und vielleicht wäre das wirklich was da, welche zu verlosen nächstes Jahr. Müsste man dann halt schauen, man muss halt die Kosten decken, weil es sollte halt idealerweise keiner auf den Kosten sitzen bleiben.
Ganz, ganz wichtig, der Tipp von Martin, nicht, dass jetzt hier alle denken, ihr könnt nicht kommen. Ihr könnt natürlich dann auch einfach eine Tageskarte in dem Museum kaufen. Das heißt, ihr müsst jetzt nicht vorbestellen, weil die sind ausverkauft. Aber wenn ihr da hingeht und dann an der Kasse ein Ticket kauft, könnt ihr dabei sein.
Genau, das ist so ein bisschen so ein Loophole, den es hier noch gibt.
Muss ich letztendlich jetzt auch machen, weil für den Sonntag brauche ich ja dann auch ein Ticket. Deswegen, ich habe mich ja heute erst dafür entschieden. Deswegen, bin ich froh, dass es diese Möglichkeit gibt.
Ja. Richtig geil, ja. Sumin fragt, Sumin Lee Kleiber, wird auf dem Kanal beim nächsten Startversuch vielleicht auch ein Livestream sein? Natürlich. Die gleichen super tollen Gäste mit Andreas von Igis Kosmos und Toni von Mondgeflüster werden wieder da sein und wir werden das gemeinsam wieder kommentieren und eure Fragen beantworten. Und jetzt kommen wir auch schon zur letzten Frage, die ich hier in der Warteschlange habe. Und das habe ich vorhin übersehen, sorry. Harzner, danke für die 5 Euro Superchat, schreibt, Sean das Schaf ist von Artman Animations. Die haben Wallace und Gromit gemacht. Und jeder sollte die Folge kennen, wo die beiden zum Mond fliegen. Uiuiui. Kennst du das?
Nachdem ich das heute sicherlich sehen werde, dann ja.
Ja.
Wenn man das kennen sollte, müssen wir uns das anschauen.
Ja, also das steht dann heute auf meiner To-Do-Liste.
Du machst dann ein Video darüber, wie realistisch das dargestellt ist.
Genau, ja. Mach eine Doku dazu. So, aber danke für die Info, Harzner, und danke für den Superchat. Du bist selbst Creator, aber danke. Das ist also viel zu nett, diese Community. So, Peter Althoff fragt mal ganz ernsthaft, warum hat das SLS eine kürzere Testphase bis zum bemannten Flug, als das vom Starship verlangt wird? Genau. Wir haben die Frage ganz am Anfang noch einmal lang und breit diskutiert, weil da einfach man muss auch nicht alles verstehen, was bei der NASA vor sich geht, oder man kann auch nicht alles verstehen. Aber das ist halt alles ein bisschen... das ist jetzt kein Geheimnis und keine Verschwörungstheorie, aber da geht es einfach nicht mit rechten Dingen zu. Das sind wirklich, wirklich mächtige Organisationen, mächtige Menschen, mächtige Lobbyisten, die ihre Interessen durchsetzen können und es auch tun. Und die scheuen auch nicht davor zurück, da irgendwie auf Kosten des Steuerzahlers einfach mal oder auf Kosten von Astronautenleben hier Aufträge abzuräumen.
Mhm.
Und das SLS verwendet natürlich auch Technologie, mit der man vertrauter ist. Mit diesem klassischen Raketensystem ist man mehr vertraut als mit Starship. Mit Starship muss viel Technologie überhaupt noch demonstriert werden, dass das überhaupt möglich ist. Bei der SLS-Rakete, die Booster kennt man aus der Shuttle-Ära, die Triebwerke kennt man, den Tank kennt man aus der Shuttle-Ära. Das Launch-Escape-System wurde neu entwickelt, aber es funktioniert im Endeffekt genau wie alle anderen Launch-Escape-Systeme. Die Kapsel ist im Endeffekt basierend auf der Apollo-Kapsel und viel moderner natürlich alles, aber vom Prinzip her kennt man sich mit diesen Vorgehensweisen und Prozessen ziemlich gut aus oder verhältnismäßig gut aus. So. Und Starship muss ich erstmal beweisen, dass es überhaupt funktioniert.
Mhm.
So. Wir sind jetzt durch mit allen Fragen.
Gut.
Und ich sehe, du bist Kanalmitglied geworden jetzt.
Warum nicht?
Das ist ja cool. Danke. Willkommen als Pilot hier auf Mars Chroniken, Andreas. Ja. Danke dir. Cool. Das ist echt nett. Danke.
Ich mache das auch bald mal auf meinem Kanal, dass ich da Mitgliedschaften anbiete. Muss mir noch überlegen, was für Boni ich da anbiete und so weiter.
Ja, das ist cool. Gut, unsere Fragen sind durch für heute. Ich möchte ganz lieben herzlichen Dank an meine Gäste sagen, an dich, Andreas von Igis Kosmos und an Toni vom Mondgeflüster für eure Expertise, für eure Zeit. Und danke an die Mods, die dabei waren. Und sorry, dass ich euch Stress gemacht habe heute. Aber ich fand es irgendwie lustig, auch euch zu ärgern. Roman möchte noch wissen, wo Toni eigentlich ist. Toni ist wieder zurückgefahren in die Arbeit, nachdem der Scrub fix war. Ich möchte Martin, Patrick, Roman, ich habe Livecraft, Adrian und Hauke gesehen im Chat. Danke für eure Arbeit, danke, dass ihr die Fragen weitergeleitet habt. Danke an den Chat. Wir waren insgesamt 1640 Leute zur Spitze und sind jetzt noch immer 642 Leute. Also Wahnsinn. Ich bin komplett hin und weg. Bevor wir noch Schluss machen hier, möchte ich noch ein bisschen kurz astronomische Einheit. Wenn ihr Interesse an Talks habt, geht auf astronomischeeinheit.com, glaube ich, oder gibt es auf Google ein astronomische Einheit und schaut mal, wann die nächste Sendung ist. Genau. Bin mir noch nicht sicher, ob das heute Abend stattfinden wird, weil der Start verschoben wurde. Aber ich werde euch noch updaten auf Twitter oder so. Und ich möchte noch kurz Werbung machen für den Where Space Shop, also unser gemeinsamer Team Space Merch Shop. Richtig coole Dinger. Da ist Senkrechtstarter. Da solltest du übrigens auch dazu kommen, Andreas. Toni vom Mondgeflüster ist dabei, die RFA, Schiffersoft ist dabei, also Rocket Factory Augsburg, Gaia Aerospace ist da mit uns am Start und es macht einfach auch Spaß im Shop ein bisschen herumzuschauen und sich coole, nerdige Sachen abzuchecken. So Hefall, also so eine Tasse möglich oder von der Art Astra-Kollektion gibt es richtig coole Sachen. Schaut mal rein und gönnt euch was.
Ja, du hast mich jetzt mit der Tasse und der Flasche überzeugt. Also
Genau.
ich werde das auch zwangsläufig machen, weil ich ja jetzt auch selbstständig bin mit YouTube. Deswegen, werde ich irgendwann dazu stoßen.
Absolut. Übrigens, das ist eine Edelstahlflasche, also richtig nachhaltig.
Erst recht ein Grund, dabei zu sein.
Genau, danke für den Link, Roman, astronomische Einheit. Gut, Sting wollte ich noch bewerben. Discord. Wer diskutiert gerne, wer gerne am letzten Stand der Dinge ist, kommt auf den Senkrechtstarter, #TeamSpace Discord-Server. Vielleicht auch noch bitte den Link in den Chat. Kommt zu uns, diskutiert mit uns über Raketen, Raumfahrt, Allgemeines und allem drum und dran. Und und mit uns Kreatoren sich austauschen und mit anderen Neugierigen und Experten und weniger Expertigen und allen möglichen Menschen, die gerne Raumfahrt interessiert sind und sich gerne damit beschäftigen. Kommt gerne auf den Discord, chillt mit uns, unterhaltet euch mit uns. Genau. Die Rakete startet heute nicht mehr. Wir sind gerade dabei, uns zu verabschieden.
Richtig.
Genau. Was wollte ich noch bewerben? Haben wir alles gemacht? Genau. Ich setze nochmal ganz demonstrativ meine Art Astra-Kappe hier auf. Gut. Passt. Möchtest du noch etwas loswerden, Andreas?
Ja, ich danke dir für die Einladung. Auch wenn der Start heute abgebrochen wurde, war das eine sehr, sehr interessante und lehrreiche Session. Also da habe ich viel vor allem auch über Raketentechnik gelernt. Das fand ich super. Und überhaupt mit lockeren Typen wie dir und Toni abzuhängen, ist immer ein Gewinn. Von daher gerne am Freitag nochmal.
Dankeschön. Danke, das ist freundlich. Das ist echt lieb. Ich habe euch echt gerne immer hier und das hat heute auch alles super easy funktioniert. Hat mega Spaß gemacht mit euch. Gut. Dann möchte ich nochmal dem Chat, allen Moderatoren, allen, die beteiligt waren, YouTube, NASA, ESA und allen möglichen beteiligten Menschen danken und sage hiermit danke fürs Einschalten. Per Aspera ad Astra.
Tschüss.
American astronauts to the International Space Station. Farther in the background, you can see United Launch Alliance's Launch Complex 41 area for the Atlas V rocket, also home to a crew access tower for future crew flights on the Atlas V and Boeing's Starliner spacecraft. So here in this one frame, you can see the 3 human-rated launch pads at the Kennedy Space Center and at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. In the foreground, obviously, the Space Launch System for the Artemis program to carry astronauts back to the moon. Beyond that, Pad 39A for astronaut flights to the space station. And in the distance, Pad 41, ULA's Atlas V launch complex that is ready from a ground systems perspective to support crew launches on the Starliner spacecraft built by Boeing. In the lower, well, here's a view of Pad 39A from the press site here from a camera we have looking out toward the east toward Launch Pad 39A. You can see that Starship tower. 7 of 9 segments have been raised and lifted onto that tower. Also, the water tower that's going to be used to support Starship launches from Pad 39A is also taking shape. And on the left is the Falcon 9 launch mount and the transporter erector arm for Falcon 9 rockets sitting horizontal down on the top of the pad, ready to roll back into the hangar sometime in the coming days to pick up another Falcon 9 rocket for the next flight from this pad. On the lower left of this view, you can see one of the transfer lines, one of the cryogenic propellant transfer lines, those vapors venting away from that cross-country line leading to one of the cryogenic storage spheres out at Pad 39B. So earlier in the countdown when we were talking about chilling down the transfer lines, that's one of those lines that flows propellants from the ground storage facility into the rocket. Just past the T-minus 59-minute point in the Artemis-1 countdown. No further update in the last couple of minutes on the technical issues being worked, namely the bleed flow to engine number 3 on the core stage and this line of frost or ice and a potential crack in the intertank area of the core stage. We haven't heard anything about that issue in some time, actually. Most of the chatter from the NASA launch commentator of late has been focused on this engine bleed issue. Typically at this point in the countdown, we'd be hearing chatter from the launch control team members themselves as they work through issues like this. But NASA is not releasing any of the countdown audio nets until the point about 15 minutes before liftoff. At that point, we will get some audio feeds from the Launch Control Center. We can listen in to the launch director poll at that point. But we're not hearing any of the discussions on the countdown loops as the team works through these issues and has worked through the tanking of the Space Launch System moon rocket. NASA has cited export control restrictions for not releasing this audio to the media and to the public. So if you're wondering why you're not hearing audio from launch control, from the launch director and the other members of the launch team, that's the reason, according to NASA, is they're not releasing any of that audio until the launch minus 15-minute point. 15 minutes before launch is when we'll begin hearing that audio. Other companies, other launch providers, such as the United Launch Alliance and SpaceX, do release some countdown audio during the fueling process of their rockets to the news media to allow for coverage of their launches, but not the case for the Space Launch System, at least for this first test flight on Artemis 1. We're not going to hear that until the final 15 minutes of the countdown. We're also not seeing any video of the launch team inside the firing room as they work through these issues. In the past, it's been customary for NASA launches dating back to the shuttle program to have camera views inside the firing room to show the launch team members in a wide view as they work through the countdown, but we're not seeing that this morning either. Just a minute or so ago, we did hear another update from the NASA launch commentator that the launch director has asked the team to come up with next steps to determine what to do next in this countdown. Again, there's the open, unresolved issue involving the bleed flow to engine number 3 on the core stage. That engine has not been able to get down to the proper operating temperature for engine ignition and launch. The flows to the other 3 engines have been working properly, according to NASA. And there was discussion a little bit earlier this morning about possible crack in the intertank area of the core stage. We haven't heard much about that in the last few minutes, but we'll stand by for news there. Also, there's the lingering issue that was an issue from the very start of the countdown, or the very start of cryogenic tanking operations, which involves a communications issue with the Orion spacecraft. We haven't heard anything about that in some time, as events may have overtaken that with all these discussions about leaks and the bleed flow on engine number 3. So we'll stand by for word from NASA on whether that Orion communications concern has been fixed or resolved. a good view of the RS-25 engines, 4 of those engines mounted on the bottom of the core stage. And the liquid hydrogen bleed flow into one of those engines is the main concern under discussion by the Artemis launch team right now. The liquid hydrogen team in the Launch Control Center is continuing to discuss options to continue troubleshooting this bleed flow into engine 3 that's not providing the engine with the proper thermal conditions for flight today. This bleed involves flowing a little bit of liquid hydrogen into the engine plumbing to get those engines chilled in for engine start. They need to be within the proper temperature bounds. There's a lower and upper limit for that. And engine number 3 is not currently able to reach within those temperature bounds due to an issue with this bleed flow. Here's a view of the Space Launch System out at Pad 39B. We've passed sunrise here on the Florida Space Coast. On the lower right, you can notice some vapors around the transfer line for liquid hydrogen that flows up the incline to the top of the launch mount from a storage sphere on the northeastern perimeter of Pad 39B. The liquid hydrogen tank for the core stage is currently in replenish mode. So there continues to be a little bit of liquid hydrogen flowing through that transfer line into the core stage to gradually replace the liquid hydrogen that bulls off into a gas to make sure that the core stage tank remains at flight level. Same thing going on with liquid oxygen. The liquid oxygen tank is in the distance. You actually can see that liquid oxygen sphere in the distance on the lower right of this screen on the northwestern side of the pad. Here's a view from one of the engineering cameras at Pad 39B showing the 4 RS-25 engines on the bottom of the core stage. Engine number 3 is the one that's experiencing this problem with the bleed flow of liquid hydrogen. And just getting our geometry right, we believe that the engine number 3 is on the lower left in the foreground here. The engine that's most prominent in this field of view, we believe, is engine number 3. Each of these engines can produce about 500,000 pounds of thrust in the vacuum of space, roughly 400,000 pounds at sea level. And they consume liquid hydrogen fuel and liquid oxygen as oxidizer. NASA says that there will be an unplanned hold inserted into the countdown at T-minus 40 minutes to allow the liquid hydrogen team to continue their troubleshooting. We expect to see the clock here stop momentarily. T-minus 40 minutes and holding. The countdown clock has stopped at 40 minutes. This is an unplanned hold in the Artemis-1 countdown. This is not yet an indication or confirmation that NASA has scrubbed or thrown in the towel for this morning's launch opportunity, this morning's launch attempt. There is still some troubleshooting plans being developed by the launch team to try to restore this bleed flow to engine number 3 to get that engine down to the proper operating temperature for launch. The liquid hydrogen team will take a few minutes here to develop that plan and present that plan to the launch director, Charlie Blackwell Thompson, and then she will consider that and decide whether to implement those troubleshooting steps. The countdown had been ticking down toward a planned built-in hold at T-minus 10 minutes. There still will be a hold at T-minus 10 minutes if this countdown clock is able to resume. There still will need to be a hold at 10 minutes to allow for the polling of the launch team for a go or no-go to enter into the terminal countdown sequence, which begins at T-minus 10 minutes. And when the countdown picks up at 10 minutes, that's when the ground launch sequencer computer takes automated control of the countdown. You can see here this view from the west looking to the east, sunrise out over the Atlantic Ocean here on Florida Space Coast this morning. And we'll stand by for further news from NASA and the Artemis control team on exactly what these next steps might be to try to restore this bleed flow to engine number 3, which appears to be a constraint for launch this morning if it's not resolved. Latest update from Artemis Launch Control is that one of those issues that we were discussing that involved the potential crack in the intertank area of the core stage, that concern has now been cleared. Engineers have determined that some frost and ice has built up in a crack in the foam, but there's the conclusion is that that crack is not an issue on the structure of the core stage itself. And NASA's launch commentator says that this is a phenomenon known as cryopumping that was observed back in the days of the space shuttle program with the foam on the external tank that used on the space shuttle. And this similar issue has been observed this morning on the ArtemisⅠ core stage. So that concern has been resolved, no longer an issue for the countdown, which continues to hold now at T-minus 40 minutes. This is an unplanned hold to allow the liquid hydrogen team over in the Launch Control Center to come up with additional troubleshooting plans to try to recover this hydrogen bleed flow into engine number 3 that is providing insufficient cooling for that engine. That engine has not been able to reach its proper initial temperature. It needs to reach a certain temperature threshold before engine start. That's enabled by this bleed flow. The other 3 engines were able to reach that threshold, but engine number 3 has not reached that threshold despite several valve cycles, including pressurization tests of the core stage to try to drive pressure through that bleed line into engine number 3. That did not work. And now the team is assessing next steps and further options that they may be able to implement to try again to try to recover that bleed flow and get engine 3 back to its proper temperature for engine start. Here's a live shot from a camera view on top of the vehicle assembly building looking down toward the launch and landing facility. This is Air Force Two carrying Vice President Kamala Harris arriving for today's launch opportunity, today's launch attempt for the Space Launch System and the Artemis-1 mission. Vice President Harris is expected to tour the Kennedy Space Center, visit facilities where the hardware for the Artemis 2 and Artemis 3 flight elements are being prepared for flight. The crew modules for the Artemis 2 and Artemis 3 Orion spacecraft are currently here at the Kennedy Space Center. So Vice President Harris will take a look at those, and she's expected to give a speech around noon Eastern Time. And she's arriving for an opportunity to view the Artemis-1 launch this morning. If the launch does go ahead, the countdown is currently in a hold at T-minus 40 minutes as the launch team works an issue involving the bleed flow into engine number 3 at the bottom of the core stage. This bleed is not providing enough cooling to engine number 3 to get it down to the proper temperature for ignition. So we're standing by for an update from the launch team as they discuss what their next steps are this morning. The countdown has been in this unplanned hold at T-minus 40 minutes now for more than 35 minutes. At the time of the hold, when this hold was begun, the NASA launch commentator said the hold was expected to last around 10 minutes to give the team time to develop a troubleshooting plan to present that to the launch director, Charlie Blackwell Thompson, and then get her sign-off on that plan. But the hold has run longer than anticipated. The launch window this morning actually opens in 28 minutes. That's the opening of the 2-hour window for the Artemis 1 launch opportunity today. Runs until 10:33 a.m. Eastern Time.